President Cyril Ramaphosa has postponed an official visit to Saudi Arabia to focus on the crisis in KwaZulu-Natal. He was due to travel this coming Tuesday, but the postponement will allow him and his cabinet to assess the damage caused by the floods. Andrew Bahlmann, who's the chief executive of corporate advisory firm Deal Leaders International, joins me now to discuss the economic impact of the floods. Very good evening to you, Andrew. Thanks so much for your time. Let's just start with the relationship between flooding and poverty. What's that like in a Southern African context?
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, obviously there's unfortunately a direct correlation. One looks at typically the areas that are impacted by floods generally are inhabited by those who are below the poverty line. They haven't got the means or the resources to build proper homes and remain very, very vulnerable. So yeah, it's very, very unfortunate, and yeah, the results are devastating.
We know that the cost of the economic impact on KwaZulu-Natal businesses is still being counted, but can you give us insight into what that impact is and how it will also affect the rest of the country?
Yeah, it's obviously the tally is still being done. Coming off July's unrest last year, coming off the back of COVID, and now this disaster that has happened. It almost hasn't allowed any form of proper recovery since the middle of last year. So the knock-on effect really for the rest of the country is because Durban is pretty much the logistical hub. Any delay, be it port, be it rail, be it road, is going to have an immediate knock-on effect. And depending on the nature and extent of the damage, those delays are going to be amount to billions of rands of lost revenue and damage. For the business owner in this part of the world, it becomes really, really difficult. One, when there's potential labor issues, there's destruction, there's infrastructure loss. So, it's a case of having to survive and invest just to get back to ground zero, if you like, before you can start trading profitably. And that's really only in the formal sector. I think the informal sector, feels it probably even more. So yeah, it's devastating in every direction, but unfortunately these things happen, and one has to just push forward and rally, and hopefully we can recover very quickly.
Tell me about this idea that you say is being spoken about in Australia of abandoning homes and buildings in high-risk areas.
Yeah, look, it's a really valid point. I think the challenge we have in South Africa is, from a economic or socio-economic perspective, we haven't got the deep pockets and financial resources that an Australia would have. But I think it's been a long time coming. I think it's not like these areas have not been vulnerable in the past, and it's government and businesses' obligation to unfortunately really take a long, hard look at it now. And, it's really, really sad that something so devastating has needed to be the catalyst, but hopefully everybody can do something about it now. But it can't be ignored. And moving forward with all the climate challenges and everything just seems to be in flux, something sustainable is going to need to be looked at.
Okay, Andrew, let's talk more about climate change. What's the economic impact of that on insurance and recovery costs?
Yeah, look, it's going to be massive. I think the insurance claims, either through direct insurers or the likes of Sasria or whatever it may be, are going to be material. I think it's one thing about the coffers. Are they deep enough to compensate? The other is, how long will compensation take? As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of businesses still rallying from the unrest last year. So, to have a double whammy almost, becomes really, really punitive. And that's if, from an insurance perspective, the reserves are there, and hopefully a lot of the business owners are properly insured. But yeah, that is going to be really, really challenging, from a direct perspective. I guess it's those other businesses that rely on logistical value chain, access to, raw materials and the likes, that are going to feel the pain probably for hopefully only the short term. And it's going to be very difficult to insure against those losses.
Yeah. Andrew, how do we then deal with an issue that you've spoken about, people who are affected most and most vulnerable being below the poverty line, needing a systemic change in order to ensure that people are not vulnerable to more floods which are coming because of climate change and the like? What's to be done to reset the economy to ensure that these kind of issues don't arise in the future when it comes to floods?
I think it probably needs to be tackled in a few directions. We deal primarily with foreign direct investment into sub-billion rand transactions, and I think it's got to be, from a government perspective and a business perspective, we can't fix everything simultaneously. We've got to start prioritizing, and as far as we're concerned, and the sustainability of our country, is we've really got to focus on those that are vulnerable, are below the poverty line. And because ironically, I think we know that internationally there is a lot of investment available to go into the space, but it's got to be channeled and controlled in a sustainable way. But I think the time has passed to form committees and war rooms and all of those things, and to start putting things into action, because anything is better than what's happening now. So it's really around prioritization, one around crisis, like we did in the early days of COVID. But we need to take this as a proper warning and start investing in the right place, because it's at this rate it's only going to become more challenging.
Andrew Bahlmann, Chief Executive of corporate advisory firm Deal Leaders International, thanks so much for your time and insight, taking a look at the challenges that are faced economically as a result of those floods in KwaZulu-Natal.